Sorry about that. The council meeting went a little long, so.
Not a problem at all. And it looks like they're getting us patched here to go live on YouTube.
Yep, we are. It says live on YouTube.
Excellent. Wonderful. Well, welcome everybody. I am just delighted to greet you here from the historic sanctuary of Beth Am Synagogue in Reservoir Hill, and to welcome Mayor-elect Brandon M. Scott to be in conversation with me this evening. I want to introduce him, though I suspect that everybody tuning in knows a little bit about who he is. But Brandon Scott is the current City Council President and Mayor-elect for Baltimore City. He is a native Baltimorean, having grown up in the Park Heights neighborhood. He's a graduate of Merville High School and St. Mary's College of Maryland. He has worked for Big Brothers, Big Sisters of Central Maryland. He served as a community liaison and city council member. He's served as city council president since 2019 and was elected Baltimore's 52nd mayor earlier this month. Congratulations. I also want to acknowledge our partners. In addition to Beth Am Synagogue and our sister nonprofit, IFO, which stands for In For Of, an aspiration for our work here in Reservoir Hill that we should be not just in and for our neighborhood, but of our neighborhood. We also have the following partners who are joining us in bringing you this series, recently elected and so much to do. And that includes the Reservoir Hill Improvement Council, the Upper Utah Madison Neighborhood Association, St. Francis Neighborhood Center, and Men of the Hill. So thanks to all of our partners for being able to collaborate with you here in Reservoir Hill and Central West Baltimore. I do want to say to folks who are tuning in by YouTube that there will be opportunities for you to pose your questions to Mayor-elect Scott. And so please do take a moment over the course of our conversation to place those questions in the chat of the YouTube. We'll dedicate a chunk of time later in the program to passing your questions along to Mayor-elect Scott. Wonderful. So permit me to begin in the following way. Rabbis like to teach. It's kind of what we do. And I want to share a teaching that I've been thinking about a lot as we begin. It's a teaching that comes from a 2nd century text from the land of Israel called the Mishnah. And it goes like this. Rabbi Hanina, who was the vice high priest, used to say, "Pray for the welfare of the government. For were it not for the fear of it, each person would swallow their neighbor alive." We are very much in need of stable, compassionate, and competent elected leadership right now. There is so much cynicism about government right now in America, but also here in Baltimore. And of course, there's a reason for that. There's a reason to be cynical about government. COVID is spinning out of control. It's rising here in Baltimore and disproportionately impacting Black and brown communities here and around the country. There's the scourge of anti-Black racism, of nativism, of violence. President Scott, incoming Mayor Scott, what do you believe is the role of government? What can you tell us about your vision for city government and your new role as mayor that will help those joining our conversation today feel less cynical and more confident about Baltimore's elected leadership?
Thank you, Rabbi. And Rabbi, I think that you started out at a very critical and very critically important point. I know, I am not coming into this with rose-colored glasses. In fact, growing up in Park Heights and living in Rabbi, a neighborhood where the world descends on it for Preakness, a horse race, and every other day of the year growing up, I wasn't even recognized as human by my own city government. It's what pushed me to public service in the first place, to be the exact opposite of what I saw year after year growing up, to work to make sure that my government was doing the things that it did not do for me, quite frankly. And when you think about the moment that we're in now, what has happened over the city, not just over the past few years, but when you think about decades of areas of disinvestment on purpose, especially as you pointed out in our poor Black and brown communities and poor communities in Baltimore City, where the trust has been broken multiple times, when the city has not been meeting the basic needs of its citizens, when it has not been keeping people safe and keeping people healthy and providing opportunity and education. What I see my role is we're coming in at a time like no other. In addition to all the things that I just mentioned, we're coming in at a time where we are in the midst of the worst global pandemic in a century. So understanding that this is not a time to come in and think that it's going to be a celebratory time, and it's not the kind of person I am and not the kind of job I like to have. I am coming in knowing that this is going to be tough, that this is going to be foundation work. That's what I when folks ask me what my term is going to be about. It's about building a foundation of how we can grow to be the best of Baltimore that we've ever have been. But when you come into a situation where city government, for example, its structure has not changed the entirety time of the time that I've been breathing on this planet. Of course, the city hasn't been able to solve and start to heal and cure itself of this disease known as gun violence, right? Of course, we aren't making meeting basic needs at this point, like even picking up recycling. When you're still operating the same structure today as you did in 1984, which the year I was born in, we have to change that. We have to build that from the bottom up in a 21st century way that's centered on equity, making sure that the neighborhoods and the people that have been left behind in this city, in the city, which birthed the first housing inequity or segregation legislation in this country. It was started here in Baltimore and taken where else. Making sure that we center it in that lens of equity, making sure that we're modernizing city government each and every way that we can to meet those basic needs, and that we are doing what's right for Baltimore and the future of Baltimore. We've had mayors, and this is no disrespect to anybody. We haven't had a mayor who has thought about the city longer than their time in office. We can't afford to have anyone else govern on a 3 year to get elected in the fourth year cycle. We need someone who wants to put the things in place, popular or not, the right thing over the popular one, even if it means that person's chances for reelection are dimmed. If they do the right thing, and this is what I commit to do, and doing the right thing over the popular one for the long-term health of the citizens of Baltimore, that's the kind of leadership we need, and that's what I look forward to doing.
Thank you for the answer, and maybe I'll build on your comment about previous mayors for a moment. When you take office next month, you'll be the youngest mayor in over a century, and your star has been on the rise. You've already run for lieutenant governor. As you indicated, 3 of the last 4 mayors have served only partial terms. So what can you say to our audience that's tuning in this evening to assure them that you're fully focused on Baltimore, bolstering its assets and addressing its many challenges?
Well, for me, Rabbi, this is the only thing I've ever wanted to do with my life, right? I tell folks each and every day I was put on this planet to serve the city of Baltimore. And when you think about my trajectory and what I've been doing, everything I've done in my public life has been for Baltimore. And really, many people always say that folks, there's like two kind of mayors. You have the folks that want to do the fancy stuff and cut the ribbons, and then you have the mayors who want to put their hands in the dirt, put their hands in the mud, be out on the street doing the non-sexy things, as you will, to make sure that the city is moving in the right direction. I'm the latter. I'm that kind of person who wants to do just that. You can see it with the cleanups that we're still putting together. We had to postpone them during the COVID, but also when you think about the things that have happened, and you think about my trajectory, this is what separates me. Uh, I'm not interested in those things. I have made more money now working than my grandparents who moved from rural Virginia or who lived on a farm in rural North Carolina could ever imagine. For me, it's not about that. Money doesn't interest me. What interests me is making sure that I'm serving my community, making my city better than the one that I had, so that one day some young person, some young woman, some young man who I have interacted with in some city school, public school over the years, will one day be able to stand on my shoulders, not have to struggle through the things that I have to struggle with, not have to deal with the issues that I have to tackle, and make Baltimore the best version of itself. Someone has to put those bricks on the bottom of the new foundation for the city. But also, there is nothing that means more to me than respecting and honoring my parents and my grandparents. I lost my grandmother last Wednesday, and understanding all that they went through for me to be here, understanding all the things and the risks that they took. I was just talking about at the council meeting how my mom's mom, who just passed away, my grandmother, took a chance. She moved to Baltimore City right after my mom was born, and that changed, forever changed the trajectory of my life. Right, understanding that I will never do anything to not just disrespect myself, but the legacy and the responsibility I have to those who came before me.
Well, thank you for that answer, and my sympathies, my condolences for your loss. Um,
Thank you.
I want to take us through a few different kind of buckets of topics this evening, leaving ample time for people to ask questions through our chat. And that's a reminder, if you're just tuning in, to go ahead and place some of those questions in the chat uh, so that we can get to as many of them as possible this evening. But let me ask you about housing. Uh, and particularly, Baltimore City has one of the highest eviction rates in the United States at 5.3%. As you know, evictions disproportionately impact Black families, Black female-headed households, um, who have an eviction rate of 7.3%. Approximately 70,000 eviction orders are issued in Baltimore City each year, and 6,000 to 7,000 households are actually evicted. And since August, landlords have evicted well over 400 families here in Baltimore City, while the COVID-19 pandemic shows no signs of letting up. So I want to give you an opportunity to share what I suspect you believe is good news from this evening's city council meeting. I'll let you let people know what happened tonight. But if you could speak about that bill and how the bill will affect, you believe, real change for housing insecure families in neighborhoods like mine in Reservoir Hill. What additional things, in addition to this bill, maybe are you intending to do to respond to those who are housing insecure?
Yeah, we know that housing insecurity, Rabbi, ties into all the other things, or the bad things that we have, and issues that we have in the city. So we have to, anytime, especially during the pandemic, try to keep people in affordable and adequate housing. Tonight at the city council meeting, we passed a right to counsel for those who are renting, which would allow renters to have lawyers and counsels in eviction procedures, which we know when people show up with actual representation, they overwhelmingly receive better results. We believe that this piece of legislation will keep people and their families in their homes. It will allow us to equitably deal with the evictions and the issues. It will also provide us an opportunity to probably save money when you think about the cost of what happens when people get evicted, and all the other services and things that come in on the back end. Keeping people in their homes to begin with, allowing us to start to deal with those other issues, is what this piece of legislation that we passed tonight on the city council will allow us to do. And as we're moving forward, thinking about housing in Baltimore City, Rabbi, we have to, Rabbi, understand that we have to look at multiple things, right? We have to look at how when we're doing a development, that has to be done equitably in Baltimore City, making sure that we're creating more affordable housing and sustaining the affordable housing that we have here. Looking at creative ways to do that via zoning, using the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We also have to be very intensely focused on creating home ownership, especially for those who will live in the neighborhoods that you and I have mentioned multiple times tonight, those neighborhoods that were redlined, people that have been doing great jobs and doing yeoman's work, providing for them and their families, who are paying $1,200, $1,300 in rent in a neighborhood where they could probably pay $800, $900 a month in a mortgage. We have to be very intensely focused on that, creating home ownership for those people, breaking that cycle of inequity, allowing them to now do something that creates wealth generation for them and their families and something for them to pass on. I could go on and on and on about that, but I just wanted to highlight a few things.
Oh, it's so important. I was having a conversation with a neighbor recently who was describing her own story of generational poverty and doing her best, as somebody who is talented, who's creative, who certainly has the resources, who has the talent to be able to become a homeowner, and feels like she just keeps running up against the wall and not able to actually move that forward. So I'm really interested in tangible ideas. Let me connect that with another idea, which is something of real concern in our neighborhood here, and something that we think about at Betham. Betham being a 100-year-old synagogue building that's always been a synagogue. We are a 46-year-old congregation in this historic synagogue building, really striving to bear witness to the nexus of history and geography that is our place in this community, and to do so with humility, right? This has been a majority Black neighborhood for a very long time. Betham is a majority white institution, though we have very proud of our good number of Jews of color within our congregation as well. But we're cognizant of that and try to come to our work with a certain amount of humility. The question of gentrification is one that comes up a lot. And it's a real concern, especially with legacy Black residents in the neighborhood who feel somewhat mixed about the neighborhood improvements that may come along with more affluence in the neighborhood, but also the possibility of displacement of Black and Brown families. So I'm curious what tangible steps you feel neighborhoods should take to prevent displacement of the kind I'm describing, to preserve racial and economic diversity in a neighborhood like Reservoir Hill. And can you share some tangible steps that you intend to take as mayor to, as you say, interrupt that cycle of divestment from communities of color?
Well, I think there's a few things from our standpoint, from my standpoint as the soon-to-be mayor of the city. It's also, this is about Rabbi, as you know, we passed my equity assessment program a few years ago, and I'm going to have to be the mayor that enforces it. It's about making sure that the city itself is owning up, right? I can't preach equity to the private world if we're not doing it ourselves, and doing it in every way. That includes every policy and practice that we do, everything that we do. When the city itself is talking about affordable housing, we have to think about that through a lens of equity to make sure that if in a neighborhood like Reservoir Hill, where development is happening, that we are actually spending city money to help sustain a legacy and affordable units so that those folks are not displaced. It can be done. Folks just have to have the courage to do it. Thinking about, again, as I mentioned earlier, creative zoning. We've seen it happen in places across the country where they allow, for example, it might be a case where, hey, daughter and son are trying to move back in the neighborhood, and grandma is still living in a part of it. We look at creative zoning and allowing them to stay in there and making it 2 units, but allowing that family to still stay there and keeping that generational wealth there. When you think about the Affordable Housing Trust Fund itself, making sure that it's used for the purposes that we set it out for, making sure that it's funded is also a very, very critical key, even during a pandemic and an economic fallout from it. And then also, Rabbi, adding in things like land banks and other things that allow communities to help control what's happening in their neighborhoods. Everything that we can do, we must do to protect neighborhoods as well.
So let me pivot for a moment to the Jewish community specifically. The past several years have seen a significant rise in expressed anti-Semitism nationally, and an increase in anti-Semitic violence. Here in Baltimore, we feel largely safe and have good relationships with our non-Jewish neighbors. But in my 10 years here in Baltimore, I will say I have detected a broad culture of incuriosity that I think can exacerbate tensions where they exist, and allow othering of various kinds to fester. Um, we are so polarized as a nation, and certainly in Baltimore City right now in so many ways. What are your thoughts about how to build bridges of understanding and mutual appreciation between different cultures, religions, and peoples in Baltimore?
Well, I think the first and most important thing that I say to everyone, Rabbi, in Baltimore right now is we're in this moment that we're in of reckoning and racial reckoning and everything around the world. Is the most important thing is we all have to be willing to be uncomfortable, talk to people that we're not comfortable talking to, have conversations we're uncomfortable having, going into places virtually now, of course, that we're uncomfortable going into, and really learning. We will not, and cannot be the best version of Baltimore if we continue to allow ourselves to be divided in a thousand different ways. And you have to be willing to do that. You have to grow as a person. I often talk about how I've grown as a person, getting to understand different communities, different types of people throughout our city. All of us have to be willing to do that, because that's really the essence of doing more that will allow Baltimore to truly own up to that nickname of being more. And unless folks are willing to do that, then we'll be stuck in this same position. And we have to not have such thin skin when we're doing that. Folks have to understand when people are telling how they feel and their truth, that's their truth. And nothing, you can't take it personal. You have to understand, hear it, allow your truth to be heard as well, so that we can start a much overdue healing process in the city.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I'm curious if you yourself uh, want to share anything maybe that you've learned along the way about faith traditions that are different from your own, whether it's about our Jewish community or other communities of faith. And I would also love to hear your thought about the role of houses of worship in advancing your goals for our neighborhood and for Baltimore City more broadly.
Yeah, well, I would say, Rabbi, that actually growing up in Northwest Baltimore actually is a great thing. Actually forced me to be understanding and very respectful of different modes of faith. Right, growing up around a large Jewish community, obviously a large Christian community, and a large Islamic community in Northwest Baltimore, we had to understand and know and respect everyone. And I think that that for me is something that I am grateful for. But I will give a kind of similar example that I always like to give. I know that growing up in Park Heights and Lower Park Heights, when I was growing up, we were really taught to look at culturally, look at people who had addiction issues as less than us. And I had to grow and mature and understand that they were not inherently criminal, as I was taught to believe by our society at the time, but that they really were sick and that they needed help, and we should treat them in that way and try to treat them like we do anyone else that has an illness. That's the kind of growth that we're going to need for folks to do along religious lines, along lines of race in Baltimore City, along economic lines. And when you think about the houses of worship, they have always been a place of convening, perfect place to do it. They've always been a place that's well respected in the community, and a place where people can feel safe, right? And I think that that plays a critical role when you're talking about that healing and bringing people together of different faiths, of different communities, because houses of worship can be are always going to be respected and regarded in different ways.
Thanks for that. Let's talk about education for a moment. And the neglect of rec centers has been going on for years, with increasing closures and fewer resources. Among the closures is the recreation center here in Reservoir Hill that was at the former John Eager Howard, now Dorothy I. Height Elementary School. I have to say, I personally miss seeing Miss Cookie, who ran that rec center for years. And when the renovation was done, the promise that was made too is that this would be a truly community school. That even if we lost dedicated rec space for kids in the neighborhood to come and hang out and play, understanding in a pre-COVID and God willing very soon post-COVID era. But we're not going to be doing this forever, right? I promise you. I haven't heard it directly from the Lord, but I have faith that we are going to get out of this thing eventually if we all start, taking it seriously, and the research progresses and we can get a vaccine. And yet, when it's over, we're going to be left with no rec center here in Reservoir Hill. That's a real loss, a real vacuum. Um, I have to be candid. It's been difficult to work with our local school for use of physical space, not particularly with Betham, but I'm talking about community partners. And there's generally a lack of willingness or a lack of funding to be able to be more inclusive in those after school hours when the space could be. Betham has had to step into the fold. Other organizations like San Francis, but they're about to, they're doing a renovation themselves. There's a dearth of programmatic space in this neighborhood. What kinds of things do you think you can do, and how great a priority is it for you to strengthen rec and parks, and to put money into recreation centers?
Well, it's a top priority for me. And actually, I'll tell you a quick story. Actually, in the summertime, I actually went to summer camp at John Eager Howard Recreation Center. So through my daycare in Park Heights, somehow we ended up there. We were assigned there and not to CC Jackson, which I always thought was weird. But that's where I actually went to summer camp. So I have very fond memories of being down in Reservoir Hill at the summer camp and at the little wading pool that they that they had there. But as you know, one of the first things I did as council president is get money for recreation parks to be open on Saturday, Rabbi. But Rec and Parks is an agency that has been underfunded. It is a top priority for me to not just help expand, figure out creative ways to expand their funding, but also to modernize their programming and practices and how we operate, right? The fact that they were never open on Saturdays until I became the council president is fascinating to me. But thinking about how we need to not just look at the agency as a bricks and mortar agency, but also from more on the programmatic side, right? How we can partner, and we will partner better with our school system to have recreation programming in spaces in schools and other places in our communities. How we are looking to build out more. They've done a great job of having this capital program for rec and parks. How we can expand that and try to make that broader and larger. How we can partner better with community groups and organizations around programming, but also, and one of the last things I can say, how we're continuing allowing the programming to evolve. We should not still be doing the same exact things that they were doing when I was in summer camp way back in 1994 and 1995. Today, we have to make sure that the agency is evolving, and I look forward to working with the Recreation and Parks Director and the team to make sure that that happens.
Well said. Let me ask you about infrastructure. A really big concern here in Reservoir Hill is the construction of the BNP tunnel. There's been very little transparency on this project. The pathway, as you know, arcs through the heart of the Black Butterfly's western wing, conveniently avoiding majority white neighborhoods and sort of arcing through West Baltimore and through Reservoir Hill. There's a vent tower plan to be placed on Linden and North Avenue, right at the corner there, that would be multiple stories, that would vent particulates from diesel trains below into the air. There's so much, it's all shrouded in mystery. It seems to be an Amtrak project, but why then build 4 tunnels that can take double stacked rail? It's very clear to those who are paying attention that freight is involved. We're concerned about hazardous materials being brought through the city. We're concerned about pollution in a city which already has high rates of asthma, disproportionately high rates of asthma. Can I get your assurance that you're going to work to really not move this very suspect plan forward, and there have to be better solutions than what they're planning, and the lack of transparency has been really distressing, I have to say.
Well, Rabbi, as you know, I am drinking through a fire hose right now. So what you can get my commitment from is actually being more transparent, actually looking at the detailed plans that I will get as we move into the mayor's office and looking through them, making sure that the community is advised, making sure that as we make the decision on what I believe on the project, that we're consistently communicating with yourself and the other folks in the community. But most importantly for me, transparency has always been at the center for me as someone who actually authored Baltimore's open data law. We will continue to be that way, even as I assume the role of mayor, and making sure that we are communicating, understanding. I understand the needs that folks have at the port and trains, etc. But we also have to communicate consistently with our neighbors and also understand their concerns and mitigate concerns as we can along the way as well.
Let's talk about Druid Hill Park for a moment. This big project, 5-year project, it's proceeded with minimal input from the communities that surround it. A plan was drawn up, as you know, by the city, visualizing its future as a recreation area, including an amphitheater. No funds were set aside. Um, I'd love for you to talk about Druid Hill Park, which I hope you'll agree is such a gem. It's really my backyard. Both of my kids learn to ride their bikes around the reservoir. We play there frequently, especially during COVID. It's such a respite. Can you talk about the future of Druid Hill Park? And also, I noticed as sort of in addition to the question, you have Liz Cornish and Graham Coral Allen, who are on your transition team. I know both have been staunch advocates for shifting away from the posture of DOT in the past, which has been really motor vehicle centric entirely. So what's your vision for both the park, but also bike and pedestrian access and connectivity between the park and its surrounding neighborhoods like Reservoir Hill?
Yeah, no, Drew Hill Park is a gym, a gym. And actually, growing up, I spent a lot of time there. Not living that far away from Park Heights, we also often come there. I spent a lot of time playing on the basketball court. Uh, when I ran for Rec and Parks Edgewater Track and Field Club, the distance runners, we used to practice by running around the reservoir. So I know better than most how it is to dodge cars as you're running on that side of the reservoir there of the lake. But what we have to do, and I think that Rabbi is that we have to make sure that we don't make the same mistakes of the past. We have to. When I think about what can happen there with this renovation and things that are happening there, I'm thinking about like Centennial Lake out in Columbia and how we can make it more family oriented, how we can make it a destination for places for people to come, how we can look at amphitheaters and things like that, but also how we can stop from it being cut off from Reservoir Hill. I had family that grew up right there in Reservoir Hill. One of my closest cousins who I used to play basketball with, we would drive. We would not walk because it wasn't safe to do that, right? We have to make sure that we are reimagining how we're going to make connectivity from our neighborhoods to our assets like our parks, not just in Reservoir Hill and Drew Hill and neighborhoods around it, but across the city. In a city where so many people catch the bus, we have to make sure that our streets and our infrastructure is working for them, for the allow people to walk and to bike in a safe way, not just allowing folks to just drive through the city and through neighborhoods as fast as possible without any consideration for the very people that actually live there and allowing them to get around their neighborhoods in a safe way. Reimagining what transportation means and transportation infrastructure means in the city is something that I'm committed to. And that's actually why I reached out to have those individuals as part of my team, because I want them to push me and challenge me as I look to push and challenge the agencies to make sure that we are doing things differently moving forward.
Any specifics that we can expect to see? Do you feel confident that there will be an amphitheater? Do you feel confident
I
that
don't know yet. I will. All of these things we will discuss in the very near future. But what I can tell you specifically is that we will not continue the way that we have been operating in secrecy. In secrecy, we will be always communicating with the residents, and we will look to building and renovating a park that allows for more people, more families, considering all things, including making sure they're sitting in equity.
So I want to ask about one other area before I add some questions that we're curating from the chat. And I do want to encourage folks, I'm not viewing the chat, but we have Jamie Aaron, who's our program coordinator, who is looking at the chat and forwarding me some questions from there. So if you have a question for Council President Scott, Mayor-elect Scott, please do place them there, and we'll do our best to convey them to him. Let me ask you, though, about law enforcement. Obviously, public safety is a big issue for you, and as you know, trust in the Baltimore Police Department is remarkably low. You've spoken about violence as a public health issue, which I really appreciate. And you and I have spoken about the issue of local control of the Baltimore Police Department, something that we keep talking about and keeps not happening. Um, implementing other learnings from the consent decree, how confident are you in speaking with the commissioner that the Baltimore police can be reformed sufficiently to make it a trustworthy, much less racist, much less sexist, and much more constructive enterprise as it really needs to be?
I am confident. I think that one of the things that we've been lacking, Rabbi, in this reform work and this reimagining public safety work is that having a mayor that completely understands this and is committed to it, right? When you think about the fact that former Mayor Pugh, the council, we really had to push her into signing the consent decree. That means you don't have a leader that's really fully committed to it as a full term elected mayor. And that's what I'm going to be, the person that has already been in Annapolis, who's been talking about reimagining public safety and pushing the police commissioner and his team to meet these requirements of the consent decree as quickly as possible. But this is going to be tough work. We just actually just approved all of the first batch of members for the Citizen Advisory Commission to Public Safety tonight, a group that we worked on with Senator Antonio Hayes at the state level, to allowing us to have a group of citizens that come from a wide array of groups of working with our police department on implementing reforms and having these better community interaction plans. We will do that. We will continue to fight for local control. We'll continue to fight for changes and repeals of all the great things that you and I have talked about for years now, to make sure that they come to fruition, but also about building things that folks don't talk about a lot. Different levels of accountability. Accountability, when you talk about public safety and talk about the police department of Baltimore, starts and ends with the mayor of Baltimore City. That's the most important thing that I think that we've been lacking. Making sure that we're building the systems, right? Putting the technology in the place that allows us to hold people accountable. Making sure that we're doing innovative things like we announced today with our partners from the medical world and our partners in the region and Carroll and Baltimore and Howard counties about reimagining public safety and how we're going to respond to behavioral and mental health crises events, and taking the load off of police officers so that we can focus them on the things that we need for them to focus on. Making sure that we are home growing more of our public safety talent here in the city of Baltimore, that we are changing every policy that we have. The police department, although right now, Rabbi, doesn't have to abide by our equity law, has hired an equity coordinator just like the other agencies, because they know they too will be held to that same standard. We can do this. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be tough work, but it has to start somewhere. And we're going to start day one to be extremely committed to making sure that we leave the department and move the department as forward as quickly and responsible as possible.
I want to turn to some questions from our participants on YouTube here. I have a question from Robin Williams, who's a Reservoir Hill resident, asking about what will be done with the old West Side building and the Parkside Rec building that sits in the back of it. You know anything about that?
Yes, I tentatively, there are some plans, and what I would say to you guys would just hold on. I can't talk about them yet, but just note that it's something that we are looking forward to unveiling and really thinking about how we can expand opportunity and recreation in the area. So that should give you a little hint of what possibly can come there.
All right, sounds exciting. Here's a question from one of our partners, the St. Francis Neighborhood Center on Linden Avenue. How can we make Baltimore a quote unquote smart city? Also, will you advocate to have app-based parking throughout Baltimore City?
To the last one, yes, I've actually been advocating for it for years. Now I can actually mandate that they actually do it. To your other point, there's many ways we can make Baltimore a smart city. I think we actually had a smart cities like task force a few years ago that I was on. I always say that the previous administration, one of her biggest mistakes was not fully implementing that. I think that we have to go back and take that under consideration. We have to also center the importance of digital in our city and how the city can be smarter, making sure that we have a digital coordinator, something that I'm committed to doing, thinking about how the city can look towards municipal broadband, how we can look towards more automation that keeps people's jobs intact, but makes our city more accessible for everyone, starting with the neighborhoods that we know are the most disconnected and need to be connected more than anyone else. There are many ways, and we're going to be looking to partner with everyone to help us do that.
Great. I have a question from a new Reservoir Hill resident, Dylan Glazer, who asked, what can city government and each of us do to help bring down the devastating rates of addiction in our midst?
Well, I'll start with city government. First and foremost, we have to change the way that we've been operating. As I said earlier, with the entirety of my life, we've been treating substance abuse like it was a criminal thing. And thinking about how we have to evolve, right? This is why I introduced and first talked about the idea of the city moving to a harm reduction approach, even to moving to having overdose prevention sites, something that has been proven to keep people alive around the world, right? When no one has died in the overdose in one of these places yet. It will be something unique for Baltimore, but we can do it. And when we're talking about getting people the help they need, the first and most important thing factor in that is they have to be alive. Then partner with our community groups to make sure and our service providers that we're meeting people's needs. And I think that's where the community comes in. We have this stigma still in our communities about people with substance abuse and how that many people look at them as less than and not even subhuman in some instances. We have to challenge that and make sure that our communities are partnering with our health department and other agencies here in the city to see what services and help they can provide, making sure that we're getting our neighbors the information that they need when they're going through something or struggling, so that we can start to work through this issue in a different way. And I'm really excited about thinking about substance abuse in a different way in Baltimore.
I appreciate that so much. I myself have learned a fair amount in the last few years about some of the pitfalls of abstinence-only approaches to substance use disorder, and thinking about it as a health crisis and not as a criminal justice issue, I think is important. So thanks for bringing that up. For folks who aren't familiar with the concept of harm reduction, I would encourage you to do some more a little reading into that. It's worth learning about as I think an important approach to the real challenge of opiate addiction and other addictions. This question comes from Melanie Dobbs, who writes, the Food Project, a nonprofit food program located in West Baltimore, has been given an eviction notice by the mayor's office. This is a huge loss to a neighborhood with high crime. Is there anything you could do to help this fantastic nonprofit once in office?
Yeah, we're going to look at that, and if we can work to reverse it, we will. I actually know Michelle very well. I knew of them before they were in the building. I was out there with them when they were actually on the street and had visited there. And my staff has been in contact, and we're going to be continue to work with them to see what we can do to help.
And here's a question from Ilana Ginsberg, who's the co-chair along with Jackie Oldham of In4Of, Betham's sister nonprofit that works on relational justice work in our community. So Ilana says, how will you push back against a state government whose decisions may not be thinking of Baltimore City residents? And I'll add that this is a trope that I've heard again and again and again, whether it's that conversation we were talking about local control, or just, a sense of, or the governor's kind of posture toward Baltimore City, which is dismissive at best. What can be done to really stand up for Baltimore and to make sure we don't get pushed around by Annapolis in all the wrong ways?
Well, first and foremost, the mayor of Baltimore has to be Baltimore's biggest cheerleader, has to be Baltimore's biggest defender. But also, I think that what I will be able to do is actually show the folks in Annapolis, building on the relationships, Rabbi, as you know, that I have with folks, not just here in Baltimore or Baltimore County, but in counties around the state of Maryland, on those relationships, showing folks that the city's now going to have focused content focused leadership that's going to be accountable, that knows how to build workers, to build team, and knows how to focus on what's better for the city, but that also is not going to be afraid to challenge people. We have to, no matter who it is. I'm always going to be willing to work with people, no matter which county, which place, which political party they come from. But I will defend Baltimore to the death. We will not allow us to continue to be a doormat. We will never shy away from the challenges that we have and show folks that, yes, these are challenges that we have. This is how we're going to begin to address them. This is our plan and our way forward. But we will not allow folks to just drag us for the sake of dragging us. We will show people that we're competent, that we're going to do the things necessary and really build that coalition. It's about coalition building around the region to showcase once again how we can. Maryland will not be its best representation of ourselves. Our region will not be its best representation of itself until Baltimore is in a much better place. And I look forward to leading that effort.
Thanks for saying that. Here's a question from Kathy Eppel, who's Utah Place resident. How will you address the problem of homelessness in Baltimore?
Homelessness is an issue that we have to address in its entirety. And I think we've talked about many of the issues that we're talking about, right? We talked about making sure that people have adequate and acceptable and affordable housing. We cannot talk about homelessness in Baltimore City without talking about behavioral, mental, and substance abuse issues. We have to talk about jobs and opportunity as well. All of those things, we look forward to developing a comprehensive plan to deal with all of those things to make sure that we are tackling and ending homelessness in Baltimore City.
And here's a question from Kyle Gardner, who also a Reservoir Hill resident, who asks, this summer, an already converted row house on Madison Avenue had to go before the BMZA to get variance approval to go from 5 to 7 units due to Baltimore's minimum parking requirements. Will you support a bill similar to Councilman Dorsey's that will eliminate parking minimums to allow for sustainable infill development without encouraging car dependency?
Yeah, no, I am a supporter of getting rid of parking minimums, but I will also say this is what I also say that with a but. I also want everyone to be cognizant while I am supporting and understanding that we have to move away from just thinking cars, cars, cars. We also have to center this conversation in a lens of equity too, and making sure that we are communicating with neighborhoods and residents where these things are happening to make sure that we are living up to what we're preaching, so to speak, as well. But we absolutely have to look at minimums and getting rid of minimums where we know we should, so that we can encourage folks to have that density in a responsible way.
Mayor-elect Scott, let me go back to a question of mine. You championed the idea of having a city manager, and I believe that passed in the recent election as well. And I'd love for you to speak about the Yiddish word is tachlis, right? Give us the like the real, hardcore details of like, how is that going to make you a better mayor? Some people say that it means that, you're sort of deflecting. I don't think you need to, spend too much time on that, because I think anyone who's been listening to you know that's clearly not the case. But what does it actually do for us? Why do we need an additional position as opposed to just having a strong deputy mayor, for example?
Well, this is the thing, Rabbi, and I'm glad you brought that up. So it's a little different. It's not a city manager. When you talk about a city manager, when you go to cities that have a city manager, it's a council manager form of government, when the mayor is actually just a part of the council, and that city manager essentially runs the city. What we're talking about, we're bringing here to Baltimore, is a city administrator, much like the county administrators that all of our surrounding counties in our region have. And actually, Baltimore is one of three in the state Baltimore City, that is one in three in the state of Maryland. Doesn't operate that way. It's about separating roles, right? When you think about it like this, in its simple form, Baltimore City is a $3.5 billion entity, business or organization. You will not find another $3.5 billion entity where the CEO, the mayor, is also the CAO or the COO. Doesn't exist. When you think about it like this, so when you hear these folks rap about saying, oh, it's like shaking responsibility, I will tell them, like, does anybody say that Johnny O isn't the boss in Baltimore County? They go, no. I'm like, well, guess what? He has a county administrator who does the day-to-day operations of county government. Ironically, Rabbi, the county administrator and the deputy county administrator both come from Baltimore city government. When you think about County Executive Ball, same thing, right? When you think about County Executive Pittman, when you look at Washington, D.C., when I ask Baltimoreans if they think that the city government should continue to be run like city government has for the last 60, 70, 80 years, or whether city government should be structured and run like Baltimore County or Howard County or Washington, D.C. or Philadelphia, no one, not one person in the probably now hundreds that I've asked has ever said, well, we should just continue to do the things that we have. The difference for Baltimore is that everyone else operates this way but us. My friend Mayor Bowser is the only functioning executive elected official in Washington, D.C. right now. I think we all can agree on that. She has a city administrator that runs the day to day. She still has deputy mayors, right? I'll still have deputy mayors, but that person responsible for the day to day operation should not be. We right now, you have to have this in law. This person should be a qualified person that's proven with the experience, the knowledge, the education, the understanding of how to run a entity and agencies the size of city government. I could go out and hire someone who just barely graduated or didn't graduate from high school, no experience, and put them in and make them a deputy mayor, and there's nothing that no one can do. That's not what the citizens of Baltimore deserve. They deserve their city to be run the most efficiently, the most effectively, the most professionally. And that's what we're going to do here. This person will report to me, will be hired and can be fired by me. The other folks will report up through them so that we're managing our agencies in the most effective way. And it's not something new even to our region or into the country. It's just new to Baltimore.
And I assume you're not prepared to reveal who you're thinking of for that position at this point.
Not yet, in the near future, but not yet. Just know that we, in every position that we're recruiting for, we are using my local and national networks as the former chair of the National League of Cities, Large Cities Council. I have a lot of relationships with mayors, council leaders, city administrators, and managers across the country. Here locally, obviously, I have that to make sure that we get the best and most qualified person in that position in every other position.
So I want to be respectful of your time this evening. I think we have time for maybe two more questions. I have two more in the queue, so I'll go ahead and ask those two, and then maybe bring us toward a conclusion. This one comes from Diana Morris, who's a Bethon member and the former executive director of Open Society Institute, Baltimore. There's been a limited, meaningful support from or cooperation with counties surrounding Baltimore, despite the many resources that the city offers to county residents. What approach do you, the mayor-elect, plan to take to create more meaningful collaboration with these counties, and what can county residents do to encourage support?
Well, thank you, and thank you for this wonderful question. It's something that I haven't waited on. If folks will remember, a few weeks back, the governor of MTA announced that they were going to be cutting MTA service. I reached directly out to my partners in Baltimore County, County Executive Osechsky, County Executive Ball, County Executive Pittman and Anne Arundel, and with our current mayor, and we all in a united front went to fight to make sure that those cuts did not go. The same thing today as we unveiled this partnership around behavioral and mental health and responses through public safety, right? We're going to be doing the same thing. There are many things, and I've been talking to them now for many months about the things that we can work together on. I'll just lay out a few of them. Transportation is an obvious one. We have to use the weight of the city, the county, Howard County, Anne Arundel to fight to make sure that MTA has funding, make sure that there's dedicated funding, and in the future that we have a regionally controlled transportation agency so that one person, i.e. the governor, can't just walk away from $1 billion of free money to build a new 21st century transportation system here in the city and the surrounding counties. Has to happen. We have to work on that. Public safety. When you think about the fact that most of the guns that we recover on the streets of the city of Baltimore They don't come from Baltimore City. They come from outside of the city. We've never had a strategy of how we're going to focus on that as a city or a region, working with our partners to focusing on the flow of gun trafficking and straw purchasing is something that we can do. Expanding that work around reimagining public safety and behavioral and mental health and substance abuse responses is something that we can do. And making sure, even and when I think about transportation too, partnering in unique ways, right? Like I've mentioned to the county executive, why can't we partner to create a job center circulator that operates here in the city and in the county to get folks from areas that we know that people need access to these jobs at Trade Point, Port Covington when it comes down in the port, down in our industrial areas. Same thing for certain parts of Baltimore County to get people there. There are many ways that we have to do it. We just have to have the leadership that wants to work together. And I can tell you for sure that the four of us are excited about working together.
Great, thank you. So let me conclude with a final question here. This comes from David Roca, who's also a Betham member, and you may know from the ACLU. David says, it's so great to hear you speak about the centrality of accountability, particularly police accountability. But one of the single biggest impediments to police accountability is the LEOBR, the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, which prevents departments from disciplining an officer found to have committed misconduct in an internal affairs investigation unless and until the officer is convicted in a mini trial judged by fellow officers. We don't do this for any other class of public employee. To date, Commissioner Harrison, David is writing, has resisted supporting full repeal of the LEOBR. Will you ensure that the city and the commissioner will support full repeal in the upcoming legislative session?
Yes, David. I told some of your counterparts this, but yes, I had not told it to you. Yes, and as always, I look forward to being there and working with you guys.
Great, that's good to hear. So let me bring us to a conclusion here. We've been at it for just about an hour now, and I know you're just coming out of a full city council meeting. I don't know if you've had any dinner yet, but if you haven't, I want to let you get a little bite to eat as well before you go to bed and start another busy day tomorrow. We are really excited to continue our newly electeds series. Next, we'll be welcoming Congressman Kwesi Mfume on December 7th. And coming up in early 2021, we'll be in conversation with new Councilman James Torrance and incoming City Council President Nick Mosby. I want to thank you so much, Mayor-elect Scott, for making yourself available today, for your candor and your I think, really important words spoken not just to Baltimore City broadly, but specifically toward our Jewish community through Betham here and through Central West Baltimore and Reservoir Hill. It's been great to ask you about things that are important to our region, to our neighborhood. Let me return by way of concluding to the Rabbi Hanina text that I began with, the one where I said that we should pray for the welfare of the government. The line is if not for the fear of it, people would swallow their neighbors alive. But the Hebrew word yirah means fear. It also can mean awe. And my hope and prayer is that you and our other newly elected officials will restore some reverence to the privilege of serving. Certainly that's something I'll be praying for. We look forward to working with you toward a better and more just Baltimore. And I want to thank you again for your time this evening.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you all for having me.
Take care.